Hey Moto Tubers, welcome back to Thompson Custom Bikes Motorcycle Shop. We've got a bright yellow Sportster here. It's a 1200 custom. This bike belongs to the same person who had the Kawasaki Ninja ZX11 that I worked on a while ago. He's also got another Harley-Davidson that I will be working on and a Honda Ruckus. So pretty good customer, multiple bike customer. He wanted me to go over this Sportster. He says it's not running right. We're gonna go ahead and start it up here in a minute. Just from the initial check of the bike, I can see visually that there's some things off. These saddlebag brackets were installed and they were installed incorrectly. They're rubbing up against the rear shock here. Also, I noticed it has mid controls on it and cruiser highway pegs. However, there's only one on the left side. His throttle cables are a little bound up. His tachometer needle is completely broken. And some other little things. But some cool things I've noticed are a aftermarket oil cooler. We've got S&S heads. We've got an S&S shorty carburetor with an S&S teardrop. These side-by-side stacked short pipes are pretty cool. And of course, this super rad flame seat. So, we're gonna go ahead and start working on this bike, see what we can do, see if we can figure out what's wrong with it, try to get it started and idling. So let's go ahead and give it a shot here. Well, it started right up. Didn't even have to use the auxiliary start on these S&S carburetors. Twisted the throttle a couple times, fired right up. Starter seemed to engage. Battery seems to be fine. I noticed the left side blinkers don't work, but the right side do. I also noticed that the brake lights don't work with either the hand brake or the foot brake, but it does have a running light. So some of those little nuance electrical issues we can go over. But upon initial inspection, bike seems to be operating pretty well. I have to say it idled a little rough. I heard something in there that wasn't quite right. So we're definitely going to be pulling the carb off. We're definitely going to be taking a look at this motorcycle. I'm going to check the head work with those S&S heads on there and just make sure everything's done correctly and there's no major leaks or issues there. But other than that, let's go ahead and get started on this Sportster. You're not gonna believe it. This Sporty is running off of one cylinder. Rear cylinder's not firing. Upgraded ignition. I have a feeling it's the ignition coil. Already tested the spark plug wires. One of them was bad. Make note of that. Got to take care of that on this bike too. Got the carburetor off. You've got your two breather bolts that come off. You've got your two backing plate bolts right here that need to be accessed on the back side of the engine, which required me to take off the chrome horn. Throttle cables, your little breather tube, and the carburetor pops right off. So the plan is to go through the carburetor, possibly rebuild it, but definitely just give it a good cleaning. There's definitely some leaking going on around here, the primary side, and possibly from the oil drain tube here. There's that lovely horn I had to pull off to access those bolts. Right through there on the back side of the intake manifold. Here's the carburetor ready to be pulled apart. I already drained the fuel out of it. It's going to be sitting here for a little bit because I've got to head out of town on a trip down south. For right now, this project's going to have to wait till I get back home. Well, I've talked to the customer and informed the customer that the riser bushings on his handlebars are blown out here. And after talking with him about them and asking him about these bars, he said he's not comfortable with these bars. They're too low and wide, kind of awkward. He's 6'5", so I'm gonna go ahead and throw a set of 8-inch risers with a 1-inch pullback and a set of low moto bars. I think that should fit him well. And this setup has mid controls and a pretty sporty little seat on it. So I think a set of riser moto bars will really set this bike off well. I'm going with chrome, and I'm also going to upgrade the bushings.
As you can see, I've taken the bars off. Those things were hideous. Got a set of 8.5-inch risers, moto bars. They're actually sitting right over there, waiting on the risers. But I did a bunch of work off camera, and I just want to talk about why that happens. See, there's a lot that goes on in the motorcycle shop here at Thompson Custom Bikes. You do all kinds of work, from selling motorcycle parts, creating merchandise and getting that out to you guys, working on bikes, buying bikes, selling bikes. So there's a lot that goes on in this shop. And to be honest with you, if I had to give a percentage to the amount that I'm able to shoot in this motorcycle shop, I would have to say it's about 5%. So what you guys are getting as MotoTubers is about 5% of what goes on in this motorcycle shop. The reality is, it's just me. I'm shooting, I'm editing, and you know, shooting videos on projects like this bike here would be great. And I would love to get more content and more footage of me actually turning wrenches and certain bolts and nuts and ways to take them off and secrets and tips, but it's difficult. I have to get work done. I've got a lot of work to get done. I've got motorcycles in and out of the shop all the time, so that's kind of where we're at. I just wanted to let you guys know on this video because this has been a fun bike. There's a lot we're doing on it that's fun. Rebuilding the carburetor, new bars, rerouting wires, all kinds of cool stuff, but I just can't get it all on film. So with that said, I hope you guys understand. Make sure and give it a thumbs up. Send this out to all your moto friends who you think would appreciate this footage. And thank you guys so much for your support, and I really appreciate it. Let's get back to the Sportster.
So here we have this S&S Super E carburetor. I'm gonna go through the whole carburetor. I'm gonna do my best to show you the parts and components to this carburetor. There's the part number for you. All right, I've already loosened some of the nuts and bolts on this. I've already taken the backing plate off. As you can see, it goes here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Those 3 bolts on that backing plate are pretty important. The reason they're important, I'm gonna explain. When they're screwed in, you need to put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, because if these back out, the place they go is right down inside of your carburetor, which then will dump right into your engine and you have catastrophic failure. So you definitely don't want that to happen. Tighten them down nice and tight, but don't tighten them down too tight because this housing here can strip out, and that is the last thing you want to do, because then you'll end up having to replace the whole carburetor, and that's expensive. Those come out with a 3/16 Allen. Got some tools here. I've got your basic flathead screwdriver. I have a 5/8 inch open in box in wrench. I've got a pick, one of my favorite tools in the shop right here, and also just a small pair of little needle nose pliers. Also, we'll be using carburetor cleaner to clean a lot of the parts on this carburetor as we go. So let's go ahead and get started here. First things first, we'll name a few parts on this carburetor. This right here is the back portion of the carburetor. This is the portion that goes up to the intake manifold. You have your double throttle cable inputs, which does a push-pull motion on your butterfly valve here. I'll show you how that looks. Open, closed, open, closed. Now, getting in here and replacing all these parts, all these springs, sometimes you can get yourself into a bit of a pickle here, scarring and marring up this carburetor. This one seems to be working fine. It just needs to be cleaned. I'm gonna go ahead and replace this O-ring here that comes in our handy dandy kit. Also, another thing to note is the throttle cables that come on a stock CV carburetor with stock throttle cables will not work with an S&S carburetor. So you're gonna need to swap those out to S&S cables. Right here, you've got your enrichment portion. Now this is not a choke. Oftentimes people will call this a choke. It is not a choke. This is called an enrichment. All it does when you flip that lever to start your bike is allows more fuel to go in there. If you run the bike for more than startup, we'll call it 20 seconds, with this on, you're going to foul your spark plugs. So do not run this for more than about 20 seconds or so. Air fuel mixture knob here. This, we're gonna go ahead and pull this completely out and reset that. Fuel intake. So this is where your fuel line plugs in and goes in and fills your float bowl. This right here is your float bowl drain, and underneath this is your main jet. This area right here is your accelerator pump. I'll explain that further when we open this up. Let's get into it and start at the top of the carburetor and take off our enrichment portion. 1/2 inch. Take this enrichment screw off. There's gonna be a spring under there, and under the spring is gonna be this plunger. This plunger is what allows fuel to come in and out of that enrichment area. So there's your enrichment. Next, we're gonna go ahead and pull out our air fuel mixture screw here. I just use a basic flathead for that. Now, oftentimes, people will attempt to adjust their air to fuel, not at this location, unfortunately. I'll show you here. This is nice and dirty right there. Anyway, there's a spring on there. I'm gonna go ahead and keep that there. Mind you, we're gonna clean all these parts. But oftentimes, as I was saying, people will adjust this screw here, which is the accelerator pump screw. Don't adjust this one if you're trying to adjust or your air to fuel. You want to adjust this one, which is the one we just took out. So let's go ahead and flip the carburetor over now. Also, I'm gonna note there are 3 screws here at the accelerator pump area. This screw here you can see is short. This screw here is short. This screw here is actually long, and you will not be able to pull the float bowl off unless this long one is out. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this one first. Got a nice long screw there. And now we're gonna go ahead and with a 5/8, we're gonna pull off the float bowl drain plug. Get that out of our way. And under that, oh, let's note, there's a blue O-ring on there. Very important. Make sure that gets replaced. Should come with your kit. Inside there, you'll see is your main jet. Your main jet can be taken out with a simple flathead screwdriver. I'm actually gonna go ahead and use my little bit bigger one here and pull that main jet out. We got that loose. We'll go ahead and back this main jet out. And that should fall right out, just like that. This is a little guy. I'll show it to you here. Here's your main jet. And on the edge, the very edge, you can see it is labeled with the size of
jetting. This one here, I'm having a hard time reading. I'm gonna have to clean it, but that's your main jet. All right, now that we've got the long screw taken out, we've got our 3 float bowls taken out, we've got our float bowl drain plug taken out, we've got our main jet taken out, we can go ahead and take off our fuel inlet valve. Now these valves are made to spin and move. I've already loosened this one up. It's also a 5/8 inch. So go ahead and loosen that up. Take this guy out of here, and you'll note that there is a blue O-ring in there as well. Should be the same size as the one for the drain plug. Now, we're gonna go ahead and pull this off. Float bowl. This is the lower part that holds all the fuel. All right. Hey, the inside of that's actually not looking as bad as I was expecting it to. I do definitely see some buildup and some gunk in there, but we'll clean that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at our float bowl. Now, there's a main gasket here, which our kit comes with a new one. We're gonna go ahead and remove this gasket. I can tell you right now, this thing is old. It looks like it's never been replaced. Noting, very important little blue O-ring on there. Very important. We're also going to replace that. All right, let's get this off. Now, inside here, I can see it's pretty dirty. We've got some buildup down inside there. Our little float piece was all cockeyed and off to the side. The way you get that all out is with a flathead. Pop this flathead off. Unscrew that, and this assembly should come apart pretty simple here. Is the very, very important little piece here. This little guy right here, and I can already see that the bracket has been bent, but this little piece right here is what seals inside of our main fuel inlet. See how that seals right there? Thunk. Now if that's off, too much fuel will come in and it'll dump out and you have issues. So with that being said, I can already see that that little bracket's bent. I am not getting this out, and I honestly don't want to force it because this, I can tell, is an older carburetor. I'm just gonna leave it for right now, but I wanted to note a few things. When you twist your throttle, it activates the accelerator pump on this back side. There's a diaphragm in there, I'll show you in a moment, and it squirts fuel out of there and into the intake. I can also see that there's some old gasket left on here, which if you can see, that's very important to get all that off. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes probably off camera doing some cleaning. Maybe I'll speed the camera up for that, but let's get into some other things here. See all that gunk on there? You can see that? Very dirty, very nasty. So we're gonna clean all that up. We're gonna clean these springs up. This is the accelerator pump boot. Ooh, look at that, look at that. Pull that rod out of there, look at that thing. That guy's seen better days, huh? Clean that off. This little rubber boot in here is gonna get replaced, so we'll go ahead and pull that. Oh, look at that rubber boot's just literally falling apart. It's okay. Got my handy dandy pick here. We'll pull that piece out. That rubber boot is done. You can see it actually came out in 2 different pieces right there. So that's trash. Good thing the kit comes with a new one. There's the second part to it. Let's get to the accelerator pump side. Remember, we already pulled the long screw out, which is one of the other screws that holds the float bowl. So now we'll go ahead and pull these other 2 out. They should not be too tight, but just tight enough. Once this little accelerator pump is pulled off here, I'll show you the diaphragm and the spring inside. Very important little pieces here to keep track of. You do not want to lose. Oh, as it comes apart in my hand. All right, dirty, dirty, dirty. Gunked up old fuel. So we're gonna clean that. Inside here, we've got a little spring. And that spring is attached to this diaphragm, which is filthy, gunky, and disgusting. Got some very nasty old fuel buildup here. Look, it's falling apart right there. Powdered. And down in here, there's a ball. It's called a check valve. And there's another ball here with a spring under it. Very, very, very important. Those go back exactly the way that they are. However, these little O-rings need to be in place, and they also need to be replaced. But there you have it. There's your disassembly. All your parts, all your pieces, the general makeup of a S&S Shorty E carburetor. I'm gonna clean everything up. I'm gonna replace all the gaskets, and we're gonna speed this video up for now because we're already getting on with time. We've got the carburetor completely pulled apart. I spent a while cleaning it out, scrubbing it out, getting all the gunk out, and looking it over, making sure the surface area where the gasket is gonna seat is clean. I made sure not to knock all the debris down inside these holes. I also use some air to blow them all out, just to make sure no pieces are down in there. I've already put the diaphragm and check ball valves back together and put the cover on here off camera. I'm gonna go ahead and replace these other ones that we've got. I've also cleaned the accelerator pump and all of these other. Got the float out, it was just stuck in there. This pin, it only goes in one way, so be aware of that, and we'll make sure and adjust that accordingly. We're gonna go ahead and put this thing back together, and let's start with the largest O-ring. This O-ring should pop down inside there pretty easily. It's a fitted O-ring. It's not something that needs to be stretched or manipulated too much. Just pressed down inside that channel. Let's move on to our accelerator pump boot with a little bit of manipulation. It'll go on there. I'm gonna use a little flathead screwdriver to press down on the inside where my fingers don't fit. Just like that, we've got it on. All right. Moving on, we're gonna go ahead and replace this tiny little blue O-ring that goes over the accelerator pump right there. This important little part here, this portion of the hanger was bent pretty drastically, so I bent it back straight, as you can see there. We're gonna go ahead and hang that on here like that. Just like that. And drop this back in. Replace that set screw. Remember, it's a flathead set screw. None of this needs to be tightened down overly tight, just snug. And there's our float. Now we're gonna go ahead and replace the fuel inlet valve. And we'll tighten that down with our 5/8 inch. Remembering that there is a O-ring in there. So tighten it down, but once again, it doesn't need to be overly tightened. Accelerator pump rod back in. There we go. Moves a lot more free now. Before I forget, your main jet goes in here, and this comes off with a 1/2 inch. Once you pull this off, you'll see you've got 5 holes right there, and this is all the way through. So clean this out real good, blow it out with air, and go ahead and seat that back in. Next is going to be your accelerator jet here. You can also unscrew that, just like so. Once you get that out, you'll see the same general effect. A little dirty, we'll go ahead and clean that up, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4 holes there, and labeled the size of that jet. Go ahead and clean that out as well. And put that back in. None of this needs to be overly tightened to the point of gorilla. Okay, moving on. Main jet back in. And put the float bowl drain plug back on. That's a 5/8. Tighten that back down. There's an O-ring in there that'll seat. Got your float, actuator, plunger, retaining screw, and new O-ring on there. Place the gasket back on, making sure not to rip or tear the gasket. There you go, nice new gasket. Accelerator pump assembly back together. Drop that down in there. Make sure it seats. Drop your spring down on there. And last but not least, your screw that holds it all in place. That's a 1/2 inch. Tighten that down. Check operations. Works great. All right. We've also got our air to fuel mixture screw with that spring, nice and clean. Put that back in. Now, these are gonna be adjusted later, but for now, you're gonna go ahead and just tighten that down, finger tight, just until it seats right there, snug. Okay. All right, you're gonna go ahead and line your float bowl pieces up here, just like so. Slide it together, and there you have it. Float bowls reassembled. Start with that long screw. That extra one that we talked about earlier needs to come out. It's the 4th one that holds the float bowl together. Don't tighten it down all the way just yet. Float bowl screws go into place here. Now there are some kits you can buy that replace these with longer ones. I think Lowbrow Customs sells a kit, but for now we're just gonna go with the stock flathead screws. Screw these back down. I always do them just snug to start, and then once they're all in place, evenly tighten them down. There should be lock washers on them that you'll feel go into place. And there you have it. You've got your accelerator pump all put back together. You've got your slide pin. You've got your butterfly valve operating correctly. Pressing down on your accelerator pump. You've got your fuel inlet valve connected. Main jet, float bowl secured. You've got your enrichment secured. And of course your air to fuel mixture. All right, now we're gonna set this carburetor up to what S&S calls your basic stock settings. Your air to fuel mixture screw is going to get tightened down just by hand till it seats. Then you're gonna take your screwdriver and you're gonna back it out 1.5 turns. Next, we're gonna move over to the idle speed screw. You wanna back that out until it just barely engages. Then, once it's just touching the throttle plate, you're going to turn it 1/2 turn until it opens that throttle plate just slightly. Right there. Turn the carburetor over, and we've got our accelerator pump side. Turn this screw in until it touches the accelerator pump plate lightly, and you're going to back this screw out 2 full turns. 1, 2. That should be the stock adjustment for your S&S Super E carburetor. And at this point, your carburetor is ready to go back on the bike, making sure that you seal the intake manifold correctly and everything goes back in place nice and snug and straight. Setting your S&S carburetor to these stock settings will ensure that your bike will start and idle. However, there is a tuning process that needs to take place once you've got it installed. Over on the right side of your bike, you've got your intake manifold right here, and you've got this thick gasket. And if you notice, there's another rubber O-ring. Make sure that rubber O-ring is facing in on the intake manifold. I've already got my screws in there to hold it in place. And once we've got that lined up, we'll go ahead and install our carburetor. Okay, Moto Tubers, let's go ahead and talk about what we've done. Taken the primary off, drained the fluid, I've removed the clutch cable, rebuilt the S&S Super E carburetor. We're also waiting on the gasket, but I wanted to get this pulled apart because it was leaking from the clutch cable input and also leaking from the gasket. So this whole side of the bike was leaking pretty bad. Oh, nothing's missing. Nothing's loose, nothing seems to be broken. Glad we're getting in here to change this fluid out. It smells burnt, smells old, and looks old. Also, I noticed the rubber gasket on the outside of what we would normally call the derby cover. There's these little pings. There's 4 of them. And the gasket kind of sits on them. Well, the bottom one wasn't seated. And I have a funny feeling that's where this has been leaking from. For whatever reason, there's only one highway peg. I want to focus on the primary, the leaks. I want to focus on getting the new bars installed, the new rebuilt fresh carburetor installed. The bike's going to be sitting like this for a little while until we get those parts in. Risers just came in. We got the bars. Let's go ahead and get this moto bar setup put on. New primary gasket came yesterday, so I'm going to go ahead and get this buttoned up today. We should also be able to get the hand controls finished up top along with the carburetor installed. I'm going to go ahead and get this buttoned up today. Most of this primary work is pretty straightforward. I haven't dug in too far, as you can see. So we're going to speed this video up so you guys can see the process, and we'll just get some things knocked out on this Sportster today. All right, let's get to it.
Got primary put back together. All new gaskets and seals, O-rings, finished installing the bars, routed the wires. Haven't found the new tack yet, but I can replace that after we get it here. Got everything lined up. Blinkers are lined up straight with the headlight. All wirings routed correctly. Grips are on, levers are on, clamshells are on, bars, risers. The S&S carburetor that we rebuilt and cleaned back on and mounted to the bike. We're rerouting the cables. As you can see, these cables were chewed through a little bit because of the way they were routed before. However, the cable still operates correctly. It's just a little ugly. Put the air cleaner back on. But this bike's getting back together. Just a few last minute things to button up with the bike. Then it'll be done and ready to take on a shakedown. Oh, we've got everything buttoned up. Carburetor, air cleaner, bars, risers, controls. Next thing we got to do is swap out this coil, the spark plugs, the spark plug wires, electronic ignition. Get this bike dialed in. All right, Mototubers, let's talk used bikes here. This bike came in running on one cylinder, old fuel in the carburetor, and leaking primary. So we replaced all those things, rebuilt the carburetor, replaced the ignition coil and everything, took the bike out on a test run, on a shakedown ride, and it ran great. The bike rips. I get back to the shop, I shut the bike off. So my assumption is the bike's done, time to go back to the owner, let's finish this up. So I lock tight the bolts, put it back together, go to start the bike again, and absolutely nothing happens. Now let me show you what I mean. Turn the key on, gauge lights up, switch on, nothing. Nothing. Now this is what I want to talk about. See, these wires have been cut, spliced. These wires have been cut and spliced. Wires in here have been cut and spliced. And probably more that I'm not noticing right now. There's entire plugs dangling around with nothing plugged into them. Half these wires in here were exposed, they were frayed. So this is what I want to say, Mototubers. Check it out. If you're gonna go buy a bike and it's used, like this bike has 55,000 miles on it. It's got S&S jugs, S&S, bunch of work done to it. Great, cool, sounds awesome. Check the wiring. These bikes, over the years, have so many people getting in there and cutting things and splicing things and wiring things and butt connectors and everything else you could imagine, that what you end up with is a bike that's gonna have electrical problems that will drive you absolutely nuts. So that's where we're at with this bike right now. It runs, it rides, except this ghost electrical issue. Needless to say, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. Before you go buy a used bike that's been chopped and hacked on, check the electrical. All right, let's get back to this project. Well, the shakedown went well. Bike starts, runs, and rips. I hit all 5 gears, got it up to about 80. Brakes work. Carburetor's working great. Everything about it that we worked on works great. We even got the horn working. Leak in the primary's fixed. Bike starts up great. Let's go ahead and get that here. New ignition. Nice little bike, good little project. Well, Moto-Tubers, bike's loaded, ready to take to the customer. Let's head out. I've got customer's bike in the back of the truck there. It's all finished, ready to be dropped off. And with that being said, just a reminder, Thompson Custom Bikes will come pick your motorcycle up and drop it off for a pickup and drop-off fee. If you're in the local area, it's less. If you're outside the local area, we charge a little bit more. But just so you know, that is an option, and it's an option that worked well with this customer because his bikes are not running in a lot of cases. All right, we'll catch you later, Moto-Tubers.